The African country where war killed 5 million people in a conflict that ended only 15 years ago is in trouble again. What will it take to keep the peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a nation fought over for its riches, where the people get few of the rewards but endure most of the suffering? You're watching Round Table with me, David Foster. The DRC, some may even remember it as Zaire, has one of the biggest UN peacekeeping forces anywhere in the world, about 16,000. But it simply is not able to keep the peace at all. And there are real worries that the brutality the country saw between 1994 and 2003 could return. It is in the heart of Africa, and in recent months there have been waves of violence, rebellion, protest and political turmoil. The Democratic Republic of Congo, the size of Western Europe, is ruled over by a president reluctant to lose his grip on power. A country trapped in a cycle of state-sanctioned repression and ethnic conflict. Could it be on the brink of another civil war? The DRC, once Zaire, and before that the Belgian Congo, is a country cursed by its own natural wealth, sitting on expansive reserves of minerals, from copper, gold and diamonds to cobalt, uranium and oil. The Congolese should be rich. The country is home to 50% of Africa's forests and one of the world's biggest river systems. The DRC has the potential to provide hydroelectric power to most of the continent, but most of its people live in extreme poverty, earning about $400 a year. About 4.5 million people are internally displaced by conflict, and another 750,000 have fled abroad.
The country is also facing epidemics, including the worst outbreak of cholera in 15 years. Unfortunately, there's also an epidemic of sexual violence, most of it unreported and unaddressed, and much of it against children.
Centuries of foreign interference have shaped the DRC into a turbulent nation, and against a backdrop of civil unrest, militant groups hold sway. The DRC's UN peacekeeping mission is one of the largest and most expensive in the world, using around $650 million of the global peacekeeping budget a year. But the mission's under pressure to cut costs by $93 million, meaning it must maintain peace in the Central African giant on stretched resources. As reports emerge of unrest in the capital and renewed ethnic violence in the east, the UN estimates around $2.2 billion is needed to provide aid, a figure the Congolese government claims is overblown. While the humanitarian crisis builds, the country is suffering political pressures. President Joseph Kabila has overstayed his 2 terms of presidency and promised elections have so far failed to materialize. The DRC has been a long-suffering country in turmoil, and analysts warn there could be more difficult times ahead. Can the DRC find stability on its own terms, or does it need the international community more than ever? Very pleased to say that joining us from New York we have Hugo Salinas, Senior Political Affairs Officer at the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operations with special responsibility for the DRC. At the round table, Ben Shepherd, Consulting Fellow to the Africa Programme at Chatham House. We have Francine Mukwaya-Sodi, founder of Kitunga I Mboka, which is a health and education community organisation based in the DRC. She has family still there. And Jordan Anderson, a country risk analyst on the Africa team of IHS Market Specialing, particularly in this area. Thank you all for joining us. Hugo, I should come to you first, since I said that the UN peacekeeping operation there just isn't working. That's the opinion of a great many people. What is your feeling about it?
Well, thanks very much. I mean, I think I I would have to nuance that statement to some extent. It's clear that, as you said at the outset, I mean, not only is the MONUSCO one of the largest peacekeeping operations, but I think it needs to be set against the extremely challenging context that the mission's operating in, just in terms of the sheer size of the country. I think it's easy to forget that the DRC is more of a continent than a country. It's the size of Western Europe, and in a context that, on that scale, with very few roads, very little infrastructure, it's difficult for a peacekeeping operation.
Can I jump in a little bit here and say, look, give us an example of where you think you are doing good, because a report, and admittedly it was a number of years ago, which was commissioned itself by the United Nations, said the work was failing there, and that UN peacekeepers themselves may well have been involved in atrocities. So where are you doing good?
Look, I mean, I think where we're doing good is, and I'm glad you're citing a report from 2009, because I think one has to look at the span of the few years over which the mission's been present. When I first deployed there in 1999, as you said at the outset, the country was at war, it was divided, it was occupied by several foreign armies. I mean, in that time, I think the question of the Congo's sort of unity and its future as a nation state are no longer in question. There are certainly pockets of violence, particularly over the past year and a half. We've seen an uptick in violence in the eastern provinces and other parts of the country. But I think by and large, over the past 10 to 15 years, the country has come a long way from where it was back in 1999.
Okay, I'll get the people at the table to respond to that. Ugo, thank you very much. We'll be back with you in just a moment. By and large, peaceful. That's not what we've been reading.
I'd concur with Ugo to some extent. I mean, as you said, the DRC is vast. It's hard to imagine from a European perspective quite how big it is. It's not to minimise the consequences of the pockets of violence there have been on the humanitarian terms, in terms of displacement, in terms of suffering. It's massively important, but they're relatively geographically isolated pockets of violence. They haven't yet come together into something that looks like it's going to threaten the overall stability of the central state, such as it is. Is that how the last
major war, described as the Great War of Africa, World War of Africa in many ways, is that how that started? Little pockets here and there?
It's a long history. No, I mean, the two proximate causes really. One was the overspill from the Rwanda genocide of '94. Yeah. Millions of refugees, including many armed men, came over the borders, and that was the epicenter of the violence that kicked off 2 years later in 1996. The longer-term problem with that, cause of that, was the slow death of the Mobutu rule, the sort of paradigmatic African strongman who ruled Zaire from 65 until 97. And a lot of the sort of rottenness, to use a relatively strong word, at the heart of the way Congo's politics functions is similar now to what it was under Mobutu in the 70s and 80s. So
the ingredients are there? The
ingredients are certainly there. One of the big differences, and it's something we can talk about more, is that the regional geopolitical situation is very different now to where it was in that immediate post-Cold War era of the 1990s. The thing that took the violence in the east of Congo to a scale where they were able to cross the country and topple the government in Kinshasa was to a large extent the involvement of DRC's neighbours, primarily Rwanda and Uganda at the time.
I've got a map which we're going to discuss a little bit later on, about the involvement of other countries.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the current political situation. I mean, the elections cancelled.
Well, the most salient...
So what is happening? Is there discontent everywhere?
Well, certainly. So the elections that were meant to have been held back in November of 2016 still haven't been held. They're now scheduled for December 23rd of this year. It's a very real possibility that we're going to see those elections being pushed back and delayed again. And it's certainly very unpopular across the country that these elections are being pushed back. Well, a variety of reasons have been cited. When you speak to the Congolese government, in fact, it's a litany of reasons they give. There are security problems, there are financial issues, the voter roll needed to be updated, voters needed to be registered, new people had come of age, people needed to be removed. And it's a list in many ways that is presented as to why the elections have to be pushed back. Of course, the one reason that's never cited, but is politically very important, is the fact that there's currently a constitutional bar on President Joseph Kabila standing for re-election. As the Constitution stands, he can't be on the ballot if the presidential election is held.
And is there any sign that, as in other countries, he might be inclined to change that?
It's difficult under the Congolese constitution. There's actually a separate article of the Congolese constitution that says you can't amend the presidential number of term limits as well.
But you can change the
You could maybe change that bit. And there have been petitions that have been circulated in parts of the country by his supporters. There have been other individuals who've said we should remove and change this. There is not a clear, concerted nationwide effort to change it right now. It's certainly been something that has been floated. But again, this is a very, very unpopular idea nationally. Removing this tenet of the Constitution. And it would be very difficult to get it either through Parliament or through a referendum.
So that's a tinderbox that we need to watch out for. I should mention, and we'll come back to this in just a while, that your father was raised in Congo, the son of missionaries. This is one reason why you have a lot of interest. You still have family there, Francine. What are they telling you? Some in Kinshasa, some elsewhere, as I understand it. What are they telling you? You're unable to go back, but what are they telling you about tensions?
I mean, life in Congo basically is like people are living in open-air prison. The government in Congo actually are waging war against its own people. Like people in Congo live with $1 per day. So it's really, really tough there. And they know how to say, come to what you were talking about, the Constitution. He can't change the Constitution. He tried, but it didn't work out. But what he now is trying to do is create chaos. They're trying anything possible to postpone the election, because Kabila is not allowed to represent himself. So for them, there's only Kabila. If we decide to change the Constitution now, then we're going to have election. There will be no election in December 2018. That's
Is there a credible opposition? Because it's fair to say that you are very much against Kabila, but is there a strong opposition that you can support?
We also have a problem, as sad it sounds, we also have a problem with our opposition. We do have a problem. They like the one we have, the Prime Minister, he used to be in opposition for many years. He was a Tshisekedi, a disciple, I will call him that way. But now he's a Prime Minister. They are really weak when it comes to money, and that's another thing Kabila knows as well. He knows the technique that, well, if I offer you a post or a role, and then you will leave the opposition. The future of the Congo is in the hand of the youth. You will see a lot of movement, like we have a lot of activist movement in Congo. They're the one working with the Catholic Church, basically.
What about ethnic divisions? Because that was one of the things we were talking about when it came to the earlier conflict, one that claimed 5 million lives. Are we seeing the same tensions arising, not so much from the Rwandan refugees, perhaps, but are we seeing similar tensions rising between different groups?
In northern part of, in Ituri, we have poverty. That part they've got a lot of gold, but people live in a bestial way. So the poverty, unemployment, and the absence of the state authority bring those hatred between the two tribes, because they're fighting for land.
So just looking at my map, is that area you're talking about near Uganda, near
Uganda,
Rwanda, near the lakes?
Yeah.
Countries that, we saw the Lord's Resistance Army, we saw that in Uganda. We've now got what is it called, M23?
M23 is largely off the table. It was defeated in 2013.
Okay. Yeah.
It's the ADF.
So we'll come to you, Ugo, in just a moment to see where your particular problems with peacekeeping are. But what are the main areas of tension at the moment, would you say?
Well, just to return to this question of whether the conflict in DRC is ethnic or not, I think external media often falls into cliches when it talks about DRC. We see the country through the lens of a series of crises that seem to pop up out of nowhere, and we go back to these tired old narratives of it being an ethnic conflict. For me, the violence that's popped up in Ituri, further south in the Kivu provinces, which largely border Rwanda, further south into what was northern Katanga, and then across in the Kasai provinces, which is central DRC. They're all symptoms of a central political malaise, which, as Francine said, is about a lack of any meaningful local authority. Now, in those conditions, communities find themselves competing over land. You see a lot of violence between pastoralists, those who raise cattle, and people who farm, which, a pattern we see across a lot of the world. And there's the government doesn't.
So these are hit-and-run conflicts that are not necessarily going to develop into something bigger.
The proximate cause is violence between local communities over local authority, over local rulership, over land rights largely. Will they gather steam to the point where we can talk about Congo risking a civil war. If we look at Congo's history, that hasn't happened without the intervention of external actors. Congo is too big, essentially, and communities are relatively small. There's hundreds of ethnic communities in DRC. It's not somewhere that has one or two big ones. So, you know, for me, the risk is that we see a patchwork of extremely damaging local conflicts that could pop up nearly anywhere across the territory, that cause vast humanitarian suffering and an awful lot of stress on the UN.
And you think
but it won't get over that threshold.
Sorry to sort of try and simplify this, but you think that those patchwork of regional local conflicts might only need one, perhaps, spark to make it bigger, and that spark would be international intervention. And we're talking local international. We're
talking the neighbours, and that's been the historical pattern, yes. And not to say that it couldn't happen, that something gathers enough momentum to pull in the support to genuinely change the picture in DRC, but in pure geographical terms.
Have you got any questions for Ugo? Because I've got one, and if you want to ask him, you know more about this than I do.
Oh, I'll come in with one. I think we should think of it less in terms of a spark and more almost in terms of fuel. Is that a lot of these are small conflicts, these are small militant groups that are based in a local community or in an area, and they find it very hard to expand outside that area, outside the networks and the contacts that they already have. So they're all not quite natural limitations, but there are set boundaries almost that makes it hard for conflicts to expand outside the areas they're in. What makes the difference is absolutely, as Ben said, when you have a neighbor who comes in and provides that fuel, who provides manpower, funding, logistics, weapons. That can make the difference between a localized conflict and something that's larger, which then threatens the government.
Okay, specifics. Throw something at Ugo, would you?
Well, I think it would be interesting, Ugo, to hear your perspective on, we've seen the conflict in Ituri pop up. And certainly, it's not as simple as being a Hema-Lendu conflict. It's not just an interethnic one. I'd be interested to know what MONUSCO was doing in the time before that we saw this pop up, and what the perspective that you're taking on what is driving this conflict.
I mean, of course, this is an area where back in 2003, there was serious violence that also very much tested the mission between the Hema and the Lendu communities in Ituri. And some of the violence that we're seeing today is taking place in the very same areas where that violence took place nearly 15 years ago. But I think you know, if we're looking at sort of the broader drivers and the risk going forward, I don't think we can take this violence out of its political context. Today it's Ituri. Yesterday it was the central regions of the country, the Kazais, where again, sort of local conflict dynamics became something that also had regional implications with spillover of refugees into neighboring Angola, obviously a neighboring country that has a lot of interest and a lot of stakes in the DRC. So, I mean, fully agree that the ingredients are there, local conflicts to metastasize, if you will, into something more serious. But if we're looking for that fuel, I think we have to also look to the national political crisis triggered by the failures of elections.
See, Francine and her group feel disenfranchised. Is that...
You know that what we're facing right now is obviously due to the instability we have in the government. The regime there is a really irresponsible regime. But what I don't understand is, why do you still supporting him? Why do you still believe in someone? We all know the person is, I'm really sorry to use this word, but pardon me, but he's a liar. We know that he doesn't respect the constitution, he doesn't respect the people. If you march in the Congo right now, they'll send soldiers, they'll shoot you like this. And then the UN is supporting them. The UN president, the lady, I forgot her name, she was there and meeting Kabila, and then they're talking about democracy. How could you talk about democracy with Kabila? It doesn't, for us, the Congolese youth, it doesn't make sense. Why UN still supporting international community in general? Why are they still supporting Kabila?
Well, I suppose, I'll ask you this question, Ugo. I don't suppose the UN, if it's a peacekeeping force, has a great deal of choice but to support somebody who is the legitimate, in quotes, government at the time. But are you not perhaps lending a cloak of respectability to a process that appears to be, well, being twisted somewhat?
I mean, look, you know, as you know, as a peacekeeping mission, a UN peacekeeping mission, what we do in the Congo and is determined by the Security Council and the mandate that we're given by the Security Council. The mandate was just renewed, by the way, at the end of last month, and the Security Council was very clear in terms of what the UN should be focusing on in the coming year in terms of its strategic priorities. One of those is protection of the civilian population in the context of, as we've said, spreading conflict, including in the electoral context. And the other is to support the political process, which we haven't mentioned, the agreement that was signed at the end of 2016.
Well, clearly Francine doesn't think that.
But you don't protect the people. There is a lot of, if I look at like in Benin, I watch a lot of video. The UN peacekeeping was just 1 kilometer near where they were killing a lot of people in Benin. You don't do UN peacekeeping, they are just there walking.
That's a different issue, but Benny wanted to jump in.
Well, just not to defend MONUSCO, but as a sort of point of context, I've long felt that the DRC suffers from being an arena in which a lot of players around the world play out their kind of moral ideas. There's a lot of halo polishing goes on. People come to Congo to make a point that plays back into their own politics and doesn't really make much difference to Congolese folk. And the fact that the Security Council is the one that sets the mandate, and you look back at MONUSCO's mandates and they're not necessarily the most coherent. They're being asked to do an awful lot of different things at the same time with very stretched resources. It is a symptom to me of the fact that over the long term we don't have enough concerted concentration on the DRC for its own sake, that the Security Council plays politics with it. There's fashions about what should be done, whether it's security sector reform or conversations about whether it's a Chapter 6, 6.5, 7 mission. And to me, sadly, it's a symptom of the fact that the external world doesn't really care that much about DRC.
Okay, can I just read something that I picked up and ask you, first of all, Jordan, to comment on it? This was just written about the country in general. The natural riches have attracted rapacious adventurers, unscrupulous corporations, vicious warlords, and corrupt governments, and divided the population between competing ethnic groups. Is that the situation these days? So should we watch out for people trying to rape DRC financially? And that might be the moving factor that sort of brings in outside interest rather than the ethnic tensions. What do you think?
I mean, there's obviously a very long and sad history of international actors. I mean, in Europe, in the United States, also closer to home with some of the regional powers, absolutely taking advantage of weakness in the Congo and causing weakness and insecurity in order to exploit it. I think we have to think a bit more complicated than that, is that in some ways that removes a lot of agency from the Congolese, from themselves. We can't just treat it as a passive country. And it is and in many ways this is one of MONUSCO's largest problems, is that it is compelled by its mandates to be a partner with the DRC government. And in so many ways the DRC government is not a fit partner for the kinds of work in terms of civilian protection that MONUSCO is looking to do.
Why not? Why doesn't it seem to care?
It's not even that it doesn't care, it's that many of the institutions that we would hope for and rely on don't exist. So with the Congolese military, we don't see a unified military. We still see what is in many ways a coalition of different armed groups that have been brought in, that the Congolese government does not consistently pay, does not consistently feed or equip. And which in many ways...
But it's a rich country. It's a potentially very rich country. Why does it not feed
coffers?
Yeah, where's the money going? Corruption? Is it just disappearing? Or?
A lot of the money disappears into patronage networks. A lot of it is not paid into the state coffers as it should, but is instead, for example, it's paid into the state-owned mining company. And the money disappears or isn't paid or is taken off the books, which means it can't be put into a lot of the more legitimate uses that I think MONUSCO would like to see. So
there needs to be reform. And can there be reform with Kabila?
Is an easy word. What exactly that reform looks like is incredibly complicated in a country where so much of everything depends not on the formal structures, but on personal relationships and networks.
Ben and Ugo, give Francine some hope for the future.
I think there is.
Okay, Ugo first.
Look, I'm paid to be an optimist. If not, I wouldn't be doing this job. But I think, look, we talked about the elections. I think we can't overstate the importance of getting over this election hump this year.
And you really think they'll happen?
Listen, whether they happen this year or soon thereafter, but there's clearly a momentum there. We were in a situation, I think, a few months ago, certainly last year, where there was serious doubt as to whether the political will was there to move forward. We've now seen some concrete progress. The voter register has been updated. Yeah. There are other signs that we're moving towards election. It's now a question of creating a level enough playing field so that the outcome of those elections is seen as credible by the largest.
And Ben, give Francine a reason to smile as she leaves the studio.
Well, I think, I think Francine and her colleagues are the future of the DRC. I mean, as she said, that there is a problem of credibility and confidence amongst the Congolese population, both in the country and outside, with politicians of any stripe, be they government, nominally opposition. There have been so many promises made to the Congolese population, so many broken promises over so many years, that it's hard to see that any formal opposition figure is going to gather enough momentum to genuinely challenge the system. And as was said, this is a system of patronage and networks that's got very deep roots. It's been going on for decades.
Okay.
But for young people, globally and in Congo, I think young people will be the future and they have to find their voice. And
very quickly, I'm only going to give you a chance to say yes or no.
Oh,
Have you heard anything that makes you...
Yeah, what I want to say...
seriously, yes or no? What do you
Yes.
hopeful?
Yeah, there's a hope. Definitely there's a hope, because I believe that the future of the Congo not just in the hand of the youth. Also, I believe that what I want to ask precisely international community is to let, because that's the future. If you want a problem solution in Congo, they need to let Congolese choose their own leader. They can't choose a leader for us, because as soon as they choose someone, like we had Kabila, no experience, 29 years old, never grew up in Congo, no experience, they just came and put him there.
Francine, you're going to have to continue this conversation.
So the
outside,
future, definitely
we have
the
run
future
out of
is
time.
there, because Kabila need to step down.
I wouldn't say it was entirely optimistic, but where there are people who want to change things, there is always hope. Ugo, thank you very much. Good luck with your work with the UN mission in Congo. Thank you all very much for coming in here for this edition of Round Table. A troubled country still, but perhaps one with a bright future given the right circumstances. Well, definitely with a bright future given the right circumstances. From me, David Foster, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.